And the second part of our live stream Q&A, Ask Me Anything this weekend. We had a wonderful one last night. A lot of fun. Went way over because there were so many great people asking so many great questions. This is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, and here every Friday and Saturday night, we bring you a live Q&A, Ask Me Anything, where you can ask me about anything social studies related, history related, geopolitics, past and present, social sciences, humanities. It's what I specialize in. I'm a historian, and this is where you guys can come and ask me anything you would like to about any historical topics and fields that you are particularly interested in. And we will be going for the next hour or so, providing you quality historical content, answering some great questions, and discussing some historical topics that are interesting. We have our social media handles in the chat, handled by my wonderful moderator, Simon the Bunny, who has also put in my Patreon, where I am building a small following there of subscribers for a small fee. You can become a friendly neighborhood historian officially on the Patreon site, or you can become a best friend historian for a slightly larger fee, but it's all very small. We're growing slowly but surely. So if you want to follow me on social media and if you want to join us on Patreon, be sure to do that. I also have a Substack where I am posting articles, historical blogs, things like that, and hopefully soon my master's thesis. But if you like history and you enjoy learning about different historical topics, consider liking and subscribing. Becoming a friendly neighborhood historian is as easy as liking and subscribing and joining the near legion, 6,000 friendly neighborhood historians that are already extant today, people who love history and enjoy this channel and the stuff that we produce. I am really grateful for all the support. Welcome to the new year. A happy new year to you if you're just joining us for the first time. This is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, where I will be answering all your questions, history and social studies related, for the next hour or so, as we are wont to do every Friday and Saturday night. And I am joining you in my official Friendly Neighborhood History live stream attire, my smoking jacket with street clothes on underneath, because that is the way people would always wear their smoking jackets, so that they would prevent the ash and the smell of the smoke from their pipes and cigars getting on their actual shirts and street clothes. So tomorrow, we will be doing our live stream lecture, which I hope you can all join us for at 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And there we will be discussing the history of the French Revolution and you can participate in the chat as much as you want, follow the social media handles. But there we're doing more of just me lecturing about a historical topic that is particularly interesting to me, and that indeed is the French Revolution, recommended by my wonderful subscriber and friendly neighborhood historian, C-Dub. So make sure to like, subscribe, show some love in the chat to my wonderful moderator, Simon the Bunny. Consider asking a question or dropping a topic or a comment about a historical topic that you find interesting. That's what we do here at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. That's what we're all about. And we do this every Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Start your weekend off by asking some history questions. And we follow it up with a second part Q&A on Saturdays at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we're just getting started right now. Welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. You've got the social media handles that I will be pinning. You can follow me there. I've got the Patreon and all that great stuff, and I will be answering your questions for the next hour or so. So my wonderful moderator, Simon the Bunny, make sure to show him love. He works so hard and does such a great job handling the chat and making sure all of the traffic is handled correctly, all of that great stuff. He did a wonderful job last night. We had a lot of people, so there was a lot of questions, a lot of comments, and he handled it well. And tonight, I promise you, unlike last night, I will not be muting myself at any time. I am very, very conscious of that microphone button and all of that, so I will not be muting. So Simon the Bunny, my wonderful moderator, great way to start us off, is already asking a question. What is your conclusion on the 1999 Moscow apartment bombings? 100% a false flag to justify the Second Chechen War? Yeah, I would say so. I don't know a huge amount about them, but I've been reading a lot about these false flag terrorist attacks. The Lavon affair and the USS Liberty have been brought up in the chat, so I've actually been doing some investigation into those things. And I think, Simon, that there's a lot of these. There's got to be a name for them, but it's basically a false attack, a false flag, like you said, to raise alarms. It's almost like a red herring that's thrown out by people. They cause this activity to happen, and then all of a sudden you have chaos and disorder and all sorts of political disruption, and it's only to achieve and promote your own goals and things like that. So hopefully everyone can hear me with my new technology. Hopefully you're enjoying the lighting and the background and all of the stuff that I've been working on, but also hopefully you guys can hear me well over the new microphones and everything. So yeah, so let's see here. Going through the chat, we've got some wonderful people here. C-Dub, to French Revolution. Can't wait. Tomorrow, live stream lecture, 1 p.m. Pacific time, 10 a.m. in Hawaii. Really, really looking forward to that. I don't know what Hawaiian Standard Time is called, but I know we have some wonderful people who come here from Hawaii and really enjoy that. Rated Frog, I have a question. Why is the government hiding that the Earth is flat? The government is not hiding that because the Earth is not flat. And actually, the idea that people throughout history believe that the Earth is flat is actually not true. The ancient Greeks did not believe it was flat. Columbus did not believe it was flat, or nor was he trying to prove that it was round. The Earth just happened to be a lot larger than Christopher Columbus believed, which is why when he landed in the New World, he believed he had landed in India. So, Rated Frog, the Earth is definitely not flat. Thank you for everybody who's liking. I really appreciate that. Basically, flat Earth is a boring conspiracy theory. It doesn't really have anything, and it's based on just everybody's hiding and everybody's lying, and there's really no intrigue there that I find completely interesting. C-Dub is asking about a good topic. He's asking tell me about the 1066 Normans' conquest of England. And this is great timing because tomorrow is the death anniversary of King Edward the Confessor, who was later made a saint. And when King Edward the Confessor died, January 5th, 1066, basically England was thrown into utter chaos because of this, because of his death. And after his death, there was a succession crisis. Now, he had supposedly promised this to his friend, William of Normandy, the Duke of Normandy, who he was distantly related to, who had fought his way to power after he was the illegitimate son of a previous Duke, Robert, who had died. And William rallied the local nobles to his cause and eventually was able to become the Duke of Normandy in his own right. He had proven to be a fantastic military commander and a good leader. And so Edward promised to give him the throne, supposedly. At least that's what William claimed. Obviously, William would claim that. And then he also had a man named Earl Godwinson, who had been his chief advisor and political minister for a long time. And Godwinson held a lot of money and held a lot of sway over the nobles and the English barons. And basically, he had pushed his son, Harold Godwinson, to become the next king of England. And basically, after Edward died, with William away in Normandy and there being no way of verifying that William was the actual heir, they basically decided to let Harold become the new king of England. So Harold was crowned Harold II in January, and after that, you have the issues with you have William refusing to acknowledge that and raising an army to invade England. Meanwhile, another man, Harold Hardrada, the king of the Norwegians, in one of the last Viking raids in English history, believed that he was the rightful successor to the English throne. So he landed an army, I think, at Stamford Bridge, and was defeated in September by Harold's forces. Harold eventually, and right after that, Harold heard just the next day, William landed in England with a large invading force. This was a very successful general. It was going to be really difficult to defeat him. So Harold rallied his forces and marched south. And at the Battle of Hastings, Harold was killed. I think he was shot through the arrow with an eye, or shot through the eye with an arrow or something like that. And William was victorious and basically became the King of England after that, crowned on Christmas Day, 1066. So in a year, you had 4 different men claiming the English throne, and 3 of them actually sitting in it. You had huge battles, and you had a change. The Normans actually conquered England, and William became the king. And he was known as, by his cognomen, William the Conqueror, because of his successful conquest of England. In order to solidify his conquest, he replaced the English nobles and barons with his own people who would rule over different parts of England. He also built up fortifications and monasteries, towers, and all sorts of military buildings to ensure the ability of the Normans to control the Anglo-Saxon peoples that they were now lords over. For centuries, the Anglo-Saxons had been afraid of Viking raids, had been intimidated by the Vikings, and had fought off Vikings and been ruled by Vikings. But now that was no longer to be. The Norman conquest basically ended the Viking onslaughts into England, as well as the defeat of Harold Hardrada, who was the last Viking to really attack England and had been defeated by Harold at Stamford Bridge. But William reorganized the country and its structures. He forced the nobles to speak French. He reorganized the finances, and he basically made it clear that from Rouen in France and Normandy, he would be ruling over all of England. And he was the Duke of Normandy, who also happened to be the King of England. And for the next couple of centuries, the English monarchs are going to style themselves French lords, who happen to also be the king of the largest force on this island, the area of England in the island of Britain. So C-Dub, that's a little bit about the Norman conquest and how it basically is considered the a huge turning point in history, because it changed the way England was involved in continental affairs. It ended the age of the Vikings, in which they sought to pillage, raid, plunder, and express and expand their influence over England, France, and the rest of Europe. And so so a lot of people consider 1066 and the victory of William and him being crowned the King of England to be the beginning of the High Middle Ages and the end of what is known as the Low Middle Ages, or which was classically called incorrectly the Dark Ages. So it's an extremely important turning point in English history and in European history. So, C-Dub, there's a little bit about the history of the Norman conquest. Bob, hi, hope you're still here. The government is saying, King Kaysen is saying, the government is saying that Pearl Harbor attacks were fake, and that's why schools don't teach it anymore. Is this true, and what is the evidence? Schools do teach it. Schools don't teach it as much as they used to. And if they don't, that's not the reason why. A good reason why is the internment of the Japanese, hundreds of thousands of them, because of the reaction to Pearl Harbor and the U.S. getting involved in World War II. But if you want to learn about Pearl Harbor, I talk about it a lot on this channel. It is a real actual event. The largest invasion attack in American history. Nearly 3,000 men died. The largest attack on U.S. soil until 9/11 brings the U.S. into World War II. I actually did an entire live stream lecture, which we do on Sundays. We'll be doing one tomorrow about the French Revolution. I did an entire one of those about the French. About the attack on Pearl Harbor and World War II and the experience of the Japanese, both in the United States and in obviously Japan during World War II. So King Kaysen, definitely a real event, not taught as much as it should be, but that's a lot of history. Happy New Year to you, Jay. From Siberia, great to see you. So we talked a lot about Siberia yesterday on the chat, and a lot about Russia. Christopher Steele said at Oxford Uni that Sweden and other potential NATO countries that want to join and can and should do so. You support Ukrainians in the east of Crimea who want to be part of Russia. I don't know necessarily. I'm not a strategist in that regard. I don't know that it's going to be necessarily a good thing. I think, yes, a country that wants to join NATO should be allowed to join NATO. And I don't know about regions within a country. If you agree to be part of a country, you should probably not have buyer's remorse. I mean, Idaho and Oregon have been cut up in the northwestern part of the United States like that for a long time. And whatever the East Oregonians want, because they dislike the politics and culture of Eugene and Portland and Salem, they're not necessarily going to get that, even though they desperately want to join Idaho. They've been part of Oregon for a long time. Boundaries and borders can change, but it's going to take a huge movement to get the Eastern Ukrainians into Russia, as opposed to getting Sweden to join a supranational group like NATO. So, normal people, Casey. Well, you've definitely joined the normies. We're glad to have you here. Oh, that's cool. Reenacting the Battle of Hastings in elementary school. I've done battle reenactments. They're a lot of fun, but they're very messy because you got to use something as a substitute for, guns and weapons and ammo and stuff like that. Bows. You could use bows and arrows and swords actually pretty easily in a reenactment. Anthony, hello. Good to see you. Were they operating on a January through December calendar back then? Yes, C-Dub, that is true. Most of Europe by that time had accepted the Gregorian calendar, which was created by Pope Gregory. The Julian calendar was the other calendar, and it is about 2 weeks behind the Gregorian calendar. So some people, the Berber peoples in northern Africa, still follow the Julian calendar. The Orthodox Church follows the calendar. So although places like Russia and Ukraine and Bulgaria, it's still January 5th, 4th today, they are going by their standards of a Julian calendar to celebrate Christmas on January 6th, which is considered the last day of Christmas anyways. So they did follow a January through December calendar back then. Mike, so good to see you. As always, a pleasure. Yes, I had to say that Pearl Harbor is an actual event. Well, Egg, if I'm more boring, fine. Please ask a question, and I will be able to entertain you about that, whatever topic you are interested in, social studies, geopolitics. It's what we do here. And yes, if you have a question, drop it in the chat. Yesterday's live stream was a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed that one a lot. We had a lot of great questions and everything. Lighter crowd tonight, but that's perfectly okay. I'm perfectly willing to roll with it. But anything you want to talk about or ask social studies, history related, happy to do so. And yes, our goal is 6,000, 80 away from 6,000, a legion of friendly neighborhood historians. They're friendly, so they won't fight. But to say we have a legion of followers, it just feels really good. So, anyways, this is what we do. I love music. Good to see you. Always great to see you. You did so much for the chat yesterday. You did so much for our discussion yesterday. You asked so many great questions. I'm so glad that you're here. And Global, always a pleasure. Do historians only get certificates framed on walls, or do they reward with a trophy? Asking for a friend. I still haven't. I haven't put up my diploma yet. I haven't found a frame for it. I've just been so busy with other things. I haven't put up my diploma for my master's, so I don't know exactly like that. I don't know how it works. I'm not too much into the pomp and circumstance of these things. When I went for my master's and went through the graduation process and everything, I had a very stone cold expression on me because I just wanted it to be over and done with. Everybody else was sitting around me taking selfies, looking at their phones, doing all of this, and I'm just like, what time does this get out again? How long are we going to be here for? Please tell me the commencement address is not that long. I just wanted it to be over and done with. That's just kind of the person I am. But yeah, that's I don't know how some historians will frame it. I've never been rewarded with a trophy. Well, that's actually not true. When I was in college, I was awarded best historian in my senior class, and I had a little plaque made for me, and so that was an award, I suppose, a trophy. So I guess it goes back and forth. It all depends. Obviously, the certificates that matter the most are the sheepskins: high school diploma, college diploma with a bachelor's in history, a master's of arts in history, and of course a doctorate in history, a PhD, which of course is what's next up for me in my level of study and things. And of course, my biggest goal is to continue to provide quality content here on the channel. So if you have a comment or a topic you want to bring up that you think will improve the quality of our live streams and what we are doing, please do so. I really, really enjoy that. C-Dub, my wonderful subscriber and friendly neighborhood historian, gave us our live stream lecture topic for tomorrow by bringing up the French Revolution. And we didn't get to it last week because we were so engrossed in a discussion of Hanukkah. Yes, we talk about religion here on the channel because religion and history are interconnected in many ways and both extremely important. But if you have a topic or a comment that you want to see on a live stream lecture or on a video, let me know and I will get to it. I just did a video about Burmese independence, which happened today in 1948. After 25 years of struggle and after sacrificing themselves for the British during World War II, the Burmese were sick of it. And like many Asian countries in World War II that were attacked by the Japanese, got their independence. The Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and of course, Burma. Or Myanmar, as it's now called. All of these places were sick and tired of their imperial overlords and being targets of militant forces, and hated the Japanese oppressing them as well. The death marches of Bataan is an example of this. And so they threw off the yoke after World War II. Sukarno in Indonesia, obviously Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam. The United States granted the Philippines independence because they didn't want to have colonies dealing with the Soviets, who called them imperial colonizers. And the British, already under pressure to give up India, also gave up Burma, which, if you read the Burmese Declaration of Independence, which I did, it's nothing like the American Declaration of Independence, because it's just about how the British have been awfully cruel and try to strip away their national heritage and identity, yet they remain firm and resolute in being good Burmese people. What's interesting though, and the reason I bring that up is somebody was recently asking me to do a video on Burma's fights during World War II and the campaign the Japanese waged through there. So now I have some material and content I can get into there. So yeah. Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We got some new people in the chat. William, good to see you. And Nicholas, it's always great to see you. Thank you for joining us. Yes, the New Orleans attack, 15 people died just out of nowhere, just like every terrorist attack coming out of nowhere. So, yeah, an interesting year, 2024. What is the first group of people that had colonized living like with government and taxes and all that stuff that makes a group success? What do you mean? What was the first group to be colonized? People have been colonizing each other for as long as human history. What the Europeans did that was different with colonization was the ability to go great lengths and use their technology, their seafaring technology of the 15th century, the astrolabe, the magnetic compass, invented by the Chinese, most of these, by the way, and the carrack, the faster ships, to be able to travel to new areas, colonize, and subjugate the peoples who were there. And that's what makes that unique. And the first examples of this are obviously the Spanish doing this in the Caribbean. The Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494 supposedly divides the world for colonial spheres. The eastern part goes to the Portuguese, who build a mercantile sea trading empire in Africa and the Indian Ocean, building taking places like Goa and Macau, building forts along the African coast where they can trade for goods and slaves, and trying to spread not only their culture but Catholic religion and trade and wealth throughout India, Southeast Asia, China, Japan, and of course Africa. And they do colonize Brazil because Brazil is part of the region that they're allowed to colonize. At the same time, the Spanish get the western half of that agreement from the Pope, and that is going to include the Caribbean, most of South America, Central America, and North America. And the British and the French and the Dutch are going to ignore this because the British and French later on are going to be Protestant, and the French just don't care. So they're going to all colonize, but the Spanish and the Portuguese are the first two OG intercontinental colonizers, using that new technology of the late 15th century and the schools of navigation and exploration to start what's called the Age of Exploration, in which they will colonize and subjugate large portions of what is called the New World. So, C-Dub, I hope that answers your question. What do you think about Anders Breivik, worst far-right terrorist of 21st century? I don't know enough about him to comment on it, and that's something we do here in the channel. If I don't know about something, I'm going to say I don't know about it. If you had a bobblehead on your dashboard, who would it be? Napoleon. Or Napoleon, Julius Caesar with a bunch of stab wounds in it. I'd love to have a picture or a poster of Julius Caesar saying, "What are you going to do? Stab me?" Something like that on my desk would be nice. Haj, welcome. Hello. Good to see you. Who was first, the Greeks or the Romans? The Greeks were first. There were Roman people. There were people living in the Latia region, where they spoke Latin in central Italy. And the Romans were dominated by a people called the Etruscans, who they got a lot of their culture from. But when the Romans eventually conquered the Greeks, they supplanted their culture, taking what they liked from the Greeks, their architecture, their art, and their religion especially, and Romanizing it. So they changed the name of the Greek gods. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, Poseidon became Neptune, Ares became Mars. Do these names sound familiar? That's where they named the planets too. So yeah, C-Dub, yeah, that's exactly why. That's exactly the Greeks came first, and then the Romans caught up and kind of copied them later on. Do you think Murica had a hand to play in recent Berlin? What do you mean in recent Berlin? Do you mean in the fall of the Berlin Wall and the reunification of Germany and Berlin in the late 1980s? That's recent when you consider the fact that history is at least 6,000 years old. 35 years is recent. Your epitaph for Jimmy Carter, a gravestone? Um, I think that's a great question, Global. And I've done a lot about Jimmy Carter here on the channel. Really respect him and everything he did, especially after his presidency. Perhaps the most accomplished man post-presidency in history, and perhaps the only U.S. president known for being better after his presidency than during it, except maybe for John Quincy Adams. But basically, I don't know. It had to be something simple and humble and very him. Make the world a better place one step at a time. Or maybe a verse from scripture. He loved the Bible. He was a Sunday school teacher. Him and Rosalind, who were married for 75 years until she died, would read scripture to each other every day. So the Christian faith was obviously extremely important to President Carter, all of that stuff. So something simple like that, something humble, not too big. He doesn't like the glitz and the glamour. That's just not who he is. And because that's not who he is, look at what he was able to achieve because he didn't have the locus on himself. So maybe President Jimmy Carter teaches us a lesson about how to be people. A history professor once told me that the Arab-Israeli conflict really has nothing to do with religion, but I believe the control of Jerusalem is paramount. Do you agree, disagree? I don't fully agree, but I see where you're coming from. And Jerusalem's going to be an important central part of it. I don't agree with the idea that the Arab-Israeli conflict is devoid of religious understanding, because you have people now. The Christians have kind of been pushed out of the equation, but remember that area of the region was controlled by the Christians, the Byzantines, before Islam was even existed, and before the Byzantines or the Romans even existed. It was controlled by the Jews. Or at least semi-controlled by the Jews. There were different empires, the Persians, the Greeks, the Babylonians, who went through. But the truth of the matter is, at this point, you can't say it's not religious, especially when you have radical Islamic groups that are devoted to the destruction of the Jewish state and perhaps even the Jewish people. And you have radical Jews in the West Bank who are trying to settle, and they believe that God has given them that right. So there is a little bit of religious tug of war here now in that Arab-Israeli conflict. You can't say it. I don't think it starts religious, but I think it's become especially religious as it's become more and more tense. And I think the Christians have been part of that, but they've been pushed out. And the reason I keep bringing them up is because they own a quarter of Jerusalem. Jerusalem has four quarters: Palestinian, and Israeli, Jewish, and I believe it's not an Arab, an Israeli, a Christian, and an Armenian quarter. So those different quarters are it's all run by the Israeli government, but they are all monitored by a group of people, an organization that is Arab, Christian, Armenian, or Jewish. And so Jerusalem itself is central, and Jerusalem has huge religious significance. The Christians have a lot of significance and importance there, but the Jews and the Muslims too. For the Jews, that's the city. That's the city of David. He conquered it. He took it from the Jebusites, according to the Bible, and made it the Jewish capital, centralizing their political authority there. 900 years before the birth of Christ, 1500 years before Muhammad. And that's extraordinarily important. So, and at the same time, you have Alaska, and that is the place where in Arab lore and later in Muslim lore, it's not Abraham, Muhammad was brought to heaven. So a lot of that's going on. I think there's some truth to it. It's an interesting point. Jerusalem, it has a key part to play, but it's not a huge focus in this war, at least. Bye. Good. Love to see it. Love to see people from all over the world. We have people from India all the time. Thank you for joining us. We have people from India and Sweden, Finland, Australia, and they come in and they ask a question, and they're surprised sometimes to find out that I do know actually a decent amount of history about those areas. No, Mohammed, that is not still around. I think the Ottoman Empire was never defeated. That's an interesting perspective, global one that I don't happen to share, because I think that the British really did their best to pulverize them, using the Arabs as their tool to do so, and then Britain and France just partitioned them as much as possible. There are definitely a lot of Turks who would agree with you. Let me see here. Let me see. Going through the chat. Did the Hispanic people build the pyramids? Remnant truth. No. North Africans, Egyptians, and their slaves, who could have been sub-Saharan Africans or people from the land of Canaan, different Semitic peoples built the pyramids. Not the Hebrew slaves that we think of in the book of Exodus, because that's not for almost a millennium later. But the pyramids were probably built by a large contingency of Egyptian and sub-Saharan African and perhaps even Canaanite and Semitic slaves. Texas Repo. The Spartans. Well, the Spartans, what do you want to know about them? The most aggressive and warlike Greek city-state, well known for being people of honor, much like the Klingons from Star Trek, if you want to make a good parallel and comparison. Extraordinarily tough. Basically trained their people not to love the arts, to love art and music and philosophy, not for the purposes in and of themselves like the Athenian counterparts, but to love those things to become great and strong warriors, ruled by two kings and an oligarchy who basically decided who lived and died and how the city was to be run, and extraordinarily militaristic, but extraordinarily efficient at their militarism. So, yes, that is true, Simon. It's not UN anymore. C-dub. Okay, but the Romans did not conquer Greeks. That is not what. Yeah, the Romans did conquer the Greeks in the third and second centuries AD, or sorry, BC. I keep messing those up today. They did conquer the Greeks and then take their culture into themselves. Am I a Sigma male? Yes, just as much as you are, Mark. Let me see here. It seems ever happy dude. Good to see you as always. It seems a prerequisite to be religious or even Christian to be able to become a U.S. president. Do all these presidents really believe, and do Americans really believe they are religious? Yes, love the life. Well, I love having you here, and that's an excellent question. There is definitely less and less of a religiosity in America. I think there's a loss of pretense for a lot of Americans who feel they're not even going to behave as if they are Christians. I think understanding the culture of America in the last 100 years, a lot of people felt that there's three groups of people who sincerely believed in Christianity and wanted to see it lived out in the public square. A second group of people who didn't believe in Christianity but believed the culture and the dominant narrative was Christian, so they decided to kind of behave that way so they could sneak in. And I'm sure some presidents were like this and appear just normal. And the third group are people who weren't Christian, but believed that Christian principles and ethics were a good way to run society, and this is the way things have always been done, so let's go with that. So I think those three groups have been predominant in the American culture. And the second group, and there's now a fourth group, basically says, who cares? We're not Christians. We don't want to live this way anymore. They're growing in influence and combat and often butting heads with the first group as the second and third groups become less and less frequent as America becomes less and less ostensibly Christian. So America was a Christian nation when it was founded. Then it became an ostensibly Christian nation where people at least behaved as though they were Christians or wanted to be Christians or wanted their leaders to be Christians. And now it's become a post-Christian nation in many ways, as religion is severely on the decline. Church attendance is severely on the decline, and COVID amplified this. The lockdowns, people just don't seem to feel the need to go to church anymore for whatever reason. So American presidents have always had to hide behind the staple of being Christians to one degree or another. President Biden is actually one of the most highly attending church presidents in U.S. history. Lincoln and Jefferson both were unaffiliated with religions. Thomas Jefferson was a deist. The idea that every single American president has been a strong Christian is not true. There have only been two Catholic presidents. Catholicism has gotten the brunt in. There have been no Orthodox Christian presidents, and Orthodox Christianity is huge. That's because there's not a predominance of Eastern European culture and life here in America, at least in the political sphere, although there has been a growth of that in the immigration that took place in the late 19th century. See my live stream lecture about Ellis Island and immigration. But the truth of the matter, ever happy dude, is that Americans are going to continue to, for at least another few years, pretend that they want their presidents to be Christian and moral, and less people care. I mean, look at Donald Trump's personality. He's brusque, he's rude. He doesn't necessarily come off as somebody who's living out the Beatitudes from the Sermon on the Mount. He also is somebody who was supported by evangelical Christians because of his stance on abortion, but who probably has had women commit abortions and has also been has bragged about his infidelities. You have the Billy Bush tapes and things like that. And so Christianity in America lost some of its prestige, I think, by embracing Trump. They traded the abortion thing, which they got repealed through the Dobbs decision, for an actual person who is in behavior almost seemingly antithetical to Christ. Lack of humility, lack of moral character and conviction. Those are a lot of things. And I'm not just trying to slam Donald Trump. I'm just saying that there's a person who doesn't seem to have a pattern of behaving like a Christian, and Americans really don't care. The first time he ran, everyone seemed to care, and now no one cares. And that just shows you the change in the last decade. As the older generations, which are more religious, die out, and the more liberal secular generations grow up. And now you have a generation of people, young people, who actually their parents were not part of a Christian church and rarely attended church, and now they're being raised in a that's when you get post-Christian, because their parents were, at least their grandparents were raised in church and maybe didn't attend, but their parents were not raised in church, and now they're growing up and they have no exposure to the Christian message. Now, I'm not lamenting this. I'm just saying that this is a fact of where America is societally. And I'm sorry that answer was a long one, but that was such a great question. Ever happy dude, I had to answer it. Where do you think Israeli nukes are located? I think it is approximately 50. I guess you wouldn't tell us if you knew, or you would be I'd be honey trapped and put in prison there. Yeah, I'm not. I don't know. I'm not. I mean, I talk a lot about Jewish culture and religion and the state of Israel because people ask about that, but I'm not. I'm not privy to that information, Simon. And if I was, I would never tell you. And I know I'm dressed like I might be a super spy or know something deep and covert and secret, but I don't. We all kind of know that the United States gave the Israelis nuclear technology, and they're going to. And I believe that sometime in the next decade, Israel will get called out for this as they continue their onslaught against the Palestinians and against the Iranians. So. Guyane is asking, did the Roman Empire live on through the Holy Roman Empire, or is it just LARPing? LARPing. It's the weird spin-off sequel. It was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. There were some vestiges of this, of bringing it back in glory in its early centuries, but the continual conflicts between the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor eventually led to the downsizing of his power and influence, and the local principalities and electors and dukes and earls and nobles of Germany and Bohemia, which is now the Czech Republic, electing, and Austria voting for him. And so it was not, by the time Voltaire was around, he's right. It's neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. It started as a resurgence, but it didn't go that far. I mean, when Charlemagne was made the Holy Roman Emperor, the Byzantine Empress, who was still part of the Catholic Church, or the Catholics were still part of the Orthodox Church, depending on your perspective religiously, became infuriated because she believed she was the Roman Empress and that the Western Church and Western countries should recognize that. And the Pope told her to go pound salt. So, anyways, that's so yes, it was LARPing, but it started off as this resurgence. But there was a Roman Empire still going on, if you ask some historians, what was later called the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire that I mentioned that controlled Israel, Jerusalem, and the Middle East at that time. Um, so no more mafia family in US. It's definitely lost its way and its influence, and it used to be a much bigger, um it used to be a much bigger influence and much bigger threat and much more mysterious, but I think the mystique has been broken by movies like The Godfather and Goodfellas, and also it's just organized crime has been there's been a crackdown on that. I think the bigger rise has been in the cartels. So there are gangs in almost every different society and every different group. And if you look at immigrant groups to the United States, there's a proliferation of gang activity and organized crime. And I think the cartels are now the example of that for the Hispanic culture. And I'm not trying to say anything bad about immigrants or their culture. It's common with any immigrants. There were Irish street gangs, there were Jewish street gangs. The Chinese have the Tao, their mafia. But interestingly enough, these immigrant groups, soon after they arrive in the United States, as they are struggling to make ends meet, organized crime becomes attractive to some of their members as they try to as they decide not to go through the mainstream ways of building up wealth and accumulating influence. They decide to do it through more shady ways, especially as they're being discriminated against. They're able to make Cosa Nostra, our thing, is what the mafia was called. They're able to make a subculture that operates outside of a law and grows in influence, power, and prestige until those who are in the law, like politicians, start to pander to them, which was common in American history with the mafia, with the Irish and Italian mafia. The Irish mafia controlled the Democratic Party machine in New York. It's called Tammany Hall in the late 19th century. The movie Gangs of New York is about that with Daniel Day-Lewis and Leonardo DiCaprio. Um, but the truth of the matter is, I think there was a reaction by different uh, I'm sorry, I'm blanking, different ethnic groups who migrated to the United States who had it difficult, who faced discrimination, to get success through alternative and often criminal means. So it's common with any group, and now the cartels are just the mafia of the 21st century, if you will. C-Dub, an oligarchy is where a few powerful people with wealth and influence rule over a country. The Romans took a lot from the Greeks. Yep. Oh, you're a Lombard. That's fascinating. The Germanic tribe that migrated into northern Italy and was defeated by Charlemagne, and his reward was becoming the Holy Roman Emperor because he did that. Um, Sorry about that. Somebody was ringing the door. I waited for them to go away. Anyways, um, ever happy dude. I believe all U.S. presidents have. Hold on a second. Someone's still pounding on the door. Anyway, sorry about that. So, Lombardy, very interesting group of people, and I mean the region of northern Italy is still called Lombardy, or at least part of it was for a long time. Yes, Jimmy Carter was indeed a proud Baptist. I don't know about Obama being a Muslim. He was raised that way, but I don't think he was a practicing Muslim. Every U.S. president, especially in the last century, has asserted some sort of strong Christian faith. Donald Trump is a convicted felon, sexual predator, and a draft dodger. Well, that might be true, but all that notwithstanding, he became president of the United States. Okay, I think it was a someone dropping off something, and they were just banging on my door and yelling, and so I just told them to go away. Anyways, let me see here. Let's see here. We got some language stuff going here. Yeah, Simon and I understand English. That's our usual language. Obama was indoctrinated while growing up in Indonesia, a heavily Muslim populated country. Actually, the largest Muslim populated country in the world, believe it or not, is Indonesia. You would think it was Saudi Arabia or Iran, but actually the largest population of Muslims is in Indonesia and that archipelago there, controlled by the Dutch for centuries. Um, Let me see here. Rodolfo, great to see you as always. Please show some love to my wonderful moderators, Rodolfo and Simon. And I know I've been taking a long time to answer questions, so I'm trying to catch up with the chat in the next 20 minutes and our last final 20 minutes. But if you enjoy learning about history and social studies, geopolitics, past and present, and stuff like that, consider liking and subscribing, dropping a topic or a comment or a question you have in the chat. We've got another 20 minutes of our AMA, Ask Me Anything, Q&A, all of that great stuff. Let me see. America could increase in traditional values in Christianity. Societies in the past have historically become more conservative religious, just as culture can shift left as it is now. It could. Um, Nolan is asking, so you pro-Islam? I'm pro anyone who comes into the chat and wants to ask good questions and be a good person. I'm pro any decent person, any decent leader, any decent person in history, any decent person past or present. I'm pro that, and I'm especially pro those people who like and subscribe and consider subscribing to my Patreon. I'm sorry to do the shameless plug, but I just had to. So who you think run the world? No one's asking. I think there's a lot of people who have a lot of power and influence all over the world who we don't see on the front stage, who might be wielding a lot of power, but that's not conspiratorial to say. And by the way, it's always been like that. I do speak Spanish, but I'm not extremely fluent in speaking it, but I am extremely fluent in reading it. So if you have something you want to say in Spanish or ask me in Spanish, I'm most likely going to be able to translate it and then answer what you are saying. Interesting. What was the purpose of keeping blacks from reading? Did this happen in other cultures? Think again, it happens all the time, and it's not uncommon. It wasn't. I don't know if you're thinking of that. I think you're thinking of that was common during slave times not to educate slaves because educated slaves became dangerous. Some slaves had to teach themselves to be educated, and it was actually up to the master. Frederick Douglass had a kind master who was willing to let him learn how to read, or kind, quote unquote. The truth of the matter is, there were literacy tests that said if blacks didn't know how to read, they weren't able to vote in elections. And because most of them were just slaves coming off of slavery, they hadn't been taught to read, because if you don't teach someone to read, it's easier to control them and to keep them from thinking or trying to escape your plantation, literally, in this case. So I think again, it's all about control, and this has happened at other stages. Slaves oftentimes were illiterate. The vast majority of people in human history are illiterate. Literacy is taken for granted nowadays. It was not taken for granted in history. Illiteracy was. People read letters in front of entire crowds of people because they were the only person who could read. You had professional readers in ancient Greece who would read to the people because most people were illiterate and had no idea how to read. Interestingly enough, I've been reading a really good book on the presidents, and Andrew Jackson, because he was one of the few people who could read and understand Latin, read the Declaration of Independence at the age of 9 to his local community, who were basically all illiterate. So illiteracy is a granted thing, especially if you're trying to oppress people. So slaves throughout all of human history were virtually generally illiterate. So pizza. Who doesn't love pizza? Does the truth change when teaching different ages of students history? I don't know what you mean. I think I know what you mean. Obviously, the amount of depth and detail you go into, like you would if I'm explaining, I couldn't have this kind of conversation with someone who is 4, but I could have it with someone who's 40. So yeah, it does change. Mohammed is saying, I like mafia history in U.S. like Ozark Man, Kansas City Mob, and Cali Cartel. Mafia should come back and control all the small gang and stop killing. Yeah, but killing is part of what they do, so they wouldn't be the mafia anymore if they stopped doing it. But I appreciate your interest in true crime and U.S. history, Muhammad. And if you like learning about U.S. history and true crime, both of which I'm fascinated with and talk about a lot on this channel, consider liking and subscribing. Yes, that's definitely true. And there's the Patreon if you're interested in it. I pinned the social media. I'm going to replace it with the Patreon if you guys be so kind. I do have a public page there where you can subscribe for free. But as a European, I always what Americans in general think about the continuous use of kingdoms, royal families on our continent. At this point, there's a ceremonial element to it. So Spain and the Dutch and people like that, and the English, obviously, are the best example of this, are doing it for ceremonial purposes, but they are not doing it for, there's no backbone in it like there was centuries ago. I don't think there's a single monarchy that has any real teeth in it left in the world. There's dictatorships, but those are tyrannical political organizations based on political ideologies, not based on aristocracy, inherited wealth and land and prestige and all of that. And basically, the way monarchies have worked throughout human history is you have someone who's extremely powerful, successful, and a great leader. He rallies people around, he leads them until he dies, and then his son takes over for better or for worse. How can Bada is asking, how can history be used to free trade and balance the opposites of rich and poor? Well, it can, because we learn from, Hegel says we learn from history that we don't learn from history, and that shouldn't be the case. We shouldn't just learn about history just so that we learn moral lessons. I hate that argument, because that's like saying we should only learn science so that we know how to cure diseases. Okay, that's an important side benefit, but that's not the main reason. We learn about science because it teaches us who we are on the inside and in the world around us and how it works and functions. But we learn about history to learn who we are mentally and philosophically. We learn about the human condition. And so we can learn from examples in the past of what worked and what didn't work. So there is an experimental, almost scientific part to history. And that's why a lot of people call it a science. That's why it's also sometimes called a social science. So. Yes, Simon, the story of Emmett Till is indeed extraordinarily sad. Emmett Till was a young black man who I believe was supposedly was trying to flirt or riz up, as we would say nowadays, with a white woman. Supposedly, this wasn't necessarily ever guaranteed. He was beat up and killed by whites in the neighborhood, and he was visiting. He was from Chicago, visiting, I think it was aunt in the South, and this happened to him. It's an extremely horrible tragedy. The boy was only like 13 or 14. Really, really a terrible, terrible thing. JB's asking, who's your favorite American president? Best and favorite are two different things. That's something we should really learn in this society, but that's a great question. Best U.S. president, it's a hard one to go with. I would say I put Washington. I love learning stuff about George Washington. I find him a fascinating character. He might very well be both simultaneously best and favorite. I can never go wrong learning about Lincoln. I love Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt and Andrew Jackson are two presidents that are great for this channel, because there's just so many great and interesting stories, and some of them are sad and terrible, but some of them are quite fascinating, and that teaches us more about that human condition thing. And Teddy Roosevelt was a brilliant, brave man who had horrible views about Native Americans. Andrew Jackson was a daring and formidable general and leader who whipped and beat his slaves and thought they were property. So, yeah. Joey is saying, is it true that you can sign your name with an X and it's legal? Not sure. Eisenhower is definitely an underrated one. Freshly Wild did a lot of great stuff. And JFK, who doesn't love learning about JFK? The potential, the impact. Basically, JFK is the of the all the presidents who died in office, and there are 7. Although Lincoln is a close second, JFK's impact upon his death was the most in American history, because America changed so fundamentally in the 1960s, and it changed partly because Kennedy wasn't there to lead it. So, friendly for president in 2036. Why are you guessing 2036? Is that when you assume I'll be old enough? I don't like to give out a lot of my personal information, but who knows? Ryan, so good to see you. Hello. Thank you for joining us. Joey is saying, any president that can watch hundreds of thousands of Americans kill themselves is not a great president, so Lincoln is definitely not it. It wasn't killing themselves. It's not like Lincoln oversaw a ritual suicide. It was actually the South that started the Civil War. It was the Confederates who bombed and shelled Fort Sumter in South Carolina and Charleston and started the Civil War. Lincoln made sure that Jefferson Davis was the one that caused the Civil War and the Confederates. And he was ending a rebellion. A lot of people talk about the United States, they get super patriotic about the U.S. won World War I and won World War II and all of this stuff and saved the Europeans, which is not fully true, somewhat true, but not fully true. But nobody ever considers the obvious historical reality that the United States destroyed its own, not only succeeded in a rebellion against the British, but destroyed its own rebellion, and the U.S. won the Civil War, not the Union, the United States which was represented by the Union because the Union needed to be preserved, an Andrew Jacksonian trait from the Democrats that Lincoln borrowed during the Civil War himself. So yeah, that it's Lincoln wasn't throwing hundreds of thousands of men at each other to have them die. And when you consider the moral ramifications of ending slavery, it's I mean, that's I'm not going to say that losing human life is worth it, but you obviously had this deeply entrenched slavery that was going to cost hundreds of thousands of lives, and Lincoln had no idea. And no one bore Roach the moral stain and the moral weight of this more than Lincoln. If you look at how presidents age, Lincoln aged the worst, and Lincoln suffered mightily. Lincoln lost his own son. His wife was and him had really difficult times, and Lincoln would often stay up all night at the telegraph office trying to find out anything he could about the war. It consumed him, and he did everything he could to learn about war and learn how the Union could win the war. So, um, Ryan, you have missed a majority of it, but it's always good to see you, and I will always make time to answer your questions. Were the Indian head pennies and buffalo nickels, and to scare the UK or to honor the natives? We talked about this a little bit in channel yesterday, Global, but that's a great question. How there's the names of these different weapons and military gear that the U.S. uses that is Indian, and it recognizes the native influence on American history and who they were, but it also stereotypes them as violent, and so I think it's a way to intimidate. I think native warriors, if you've got a guy running after you with an axe who is going to scalp you, you are terrified of that man. But you're no less terrified than a native would be of a cavalryman coming in to kill his family. So there was a stereotyping of natives as violent. So that's basically where it comes from. I Love Music is saying Nixon is underrated, comparable to Carter post presidency in terms of being an elder statesman. Foreign policy expertise was incomparable in the modern presidency post World War II era. I absolutely agree. I Love Music. I don't think Nixon might be the smartest U.S. president. He was just also the most insecure U.S. president. Nixon did a lot of good. He created the Environmental Protection Agency. He expanded civil rights. Nixon was quite an interesting guy. And of course, opening China and undermining the Soviet Union really improved America's standing and it was allowed to de-escalate tensions of the Cold War. Nixon's interesting. I saw a video of him just the other day talking about Russia's position after the fall of the Soviet Union, and he was spot on and brilliant. And he basically said that the Russians are now communism has failed, but now they have to deal with this question of will freedom win? Just because communism failed doesn't, or if communism lost, and depending on how you want to see it, doesn't mean that freedom won, because the Russians hadn't tried democratic liberalism. They hadn't tried freedom. They hadn't tried all of these things that are huge and quintessential parts of the American experiment. So the truth of the matter is, yes, Nixon knew a lot, and he was quite a brilliant guy, but he had a lot of moral shortcomings that kept him from being a great president. He would be on Mount Rushmore, or in the talks of being on Mount Rushmore, or in the talks of being one of the best presidents if he had just stayed the course or done something brilliant and apologized. Reagan was willing to admit about Iran-Contra and kept him intact. When presidents are willing to admit it, they actually do a lot better than if they try to hide it or cover it up or think they're above the law. So Ryan is asking, do you think Trudeau will come to his senses, save himself the embarrassment, and step down before the fall 2025? I don't know what Trudeau's going to do. All I know is he's in big trouble. He's facing political opposition with the Conservatives, basically in a resurgence under Pierre Poilievre. He's one of the most unpopular Canadian prime ministers of all time. And he's also facing the intimidating factor from the United States. Donald Trump talking about annexing Canada, talking about tariffs. Trudeau's either going to have to wheel and deal to save himself and basically run around like a headless chicken trying to appease people who hate him, or he's going to have to resign, or he's going to face a pounding at the Liberals will face a pounding at the polls in the fall of 2025. So I'm not a huge political strategist, but there's my perspective there. Let me see here. I'm sorry that's not notifying you. And if you get notified, that makes things a lot easier. I just finished my Christmas Carol readings, by the way, guys. So if you want to check those out, get notified about those. Those are full-length videos. One of them was like 40 minutes. Check those out. I'm going to put a playlist together of those, but just finished the fifth and final stave right in time for the end of Christmas on January 6th. You can hear me read the Christmas Carol and give a little bit of background about its history and themes. So check that out if you like hearing my voice and my narration. I'm trying to flirt around with that a little bit. Did you like Nixon before he was president? Well, Nixon's an interesting guy before he was president. You have a Checkers incident. You have he seemed they already called him Tricky Dick long before then. There was already this fear of insecurity, of being bland, unlikable, and seemingly being. And it wasn't surprising to people when Watergate broke. It wasn't surprising to people that Nixon had an enemies list. Nixon was known, and at least it shouldn't have been, because Nixon was known as kind of a paranoid guy who was a little bit on the more corrupt side, and who felt that in some ways politicians and the president and the executives were above the law. He was Eisenhower's vice president. He was a Cold Warrior. He was a close friend of Joe McCarthy. A lot of people on the political left hated him, and he made them enemies. Paul Newman is a great example of this. So, and yes, get notified on all of that. Thank you, Ryan. I really appreciate your support. Joey, yes, Professor, but the war between the states was not about slavery. It was about states' rights. The states' rights to do what? So Joey, I really appreciate you bringing that up, and you're right. There was a matter of states' rights, but what states' rights to do what? States' rights versus federal rights. The federal rights to do what versus the states' rights to do what? They weren't states' rights to build giant fortresses in Tennessee and Georgia, and it was the states' rights for the states to make laws about slavery. They wanted all of the states, southern and western territories that became states, to decide for themselves whether they wanted slavery or not, or at least to embrace slavery. And Lincoln said no more slavery in the new territories, and the South interpreted that as he's going to take away our slaves. How dare the federal government try to take away our states' rights? So we're going to secede. We have the states' rights to do that. So they used states' rights as a cloak to cover up the real issue, which was slavery. And Lincoln didn't realize this at first, but he can't. Actually, he did, but he met them where they were. He said, "Okay, fine. Our federal union must be preserved. You want to fight this war about states' rights and the union and unionism? We'll do it." But then eventually he decided to redirect it towards slavery, because he wanted to notify Britain and France, if you recognize the Confederacy and demand that the war stop, you are sponsoring slavery. So, yes, Ryan, you're very welcome. This is called a smoking jacket, very popular in the 19th century, kind of a nice, known more as a dressing gown, kind of a nice, fancier version of a robe. But it was actually became popular in Great Britain as a way for people to smoke and not have it get on their street clothes. And I'm going to be wearing, and I got it as a holiday gift, and I absolutely love it. I did a video on it on my Patreon. I did a couple of videos talking about it on here. I'm doing more exclusive content on the Patreon, by the way. But yeah, it's really nice, and I'm going to be wearing it every live stream until it gets too warm to wear. So, yeah, even still, Ryan, I sometimes have to go into yeah, it happens, and sometimes I forget to do it, and that's why I'm late. But we were on time today. Make sure to get notified, guys. That's really important. Tomorrow's live stream lecture will be about the French Revolution. Thank you, C-Dub, for that topic. I'm really looking forward to it, and I really hope you can all join us. Yeah. And yes, I really want to see you, Ryan. I really want to hear your perspective, and hopefully I do a good job talking about it. Hello, No Step. Oh, great to see you. Another one of my great moderators. Make sure to show love to my moderators, Rodolfo and No Step and Simon. So great to see all of you. 3 mods. We've got a lot of power here. Yeah, No Step. We've missed you, but you always bring so many great topics and questions. Really appreciate having you. Ryan saying, being Canadian, I have a feeling it will be a repeat of basically the U.S. election results, where the Liberal Party gets demolished in the votes. It could be even worse. The projections are even worse for the Liberal Party than they are for the Democrats in the U.S. Yeah, Simon. No Step's been around a lot. He likes talking about World War II history. I think he made a channel, or was going to make a channel about World War II history that, if he did, maybe he can tell us a little bit about, and you should all go like and subscribe, because share and share alike. Eddie, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts in past President Ford? About President Ford, I think he's an underrated guy. I think he meant well, and he just wasn't the convincing, likable leader that the Americans needed at that time or place. And I think he also, pardoning Nixon was a politically wise decision, but it was a mistake that cost him on the optics side of things, and was why he didn't get elected, because then he was seen as part of the inside corruption, and Carter was seen as kind of this outside guy who was going to save the United States from the corruption of the mainstreamers, especially the Republicans. So, um, yeah. And I've been needing more mods, and I've gotten them, but no step. It's always great to have you. So, Eddie, I hope that answers your question about President Carter. Um, yes, another mod. And Ryan, if you want to be a mod, I am happy to have you join our mod team. Um, what time tomorrow? If you live in Louisiana, I believe Louisiana is Eastern Standard Time, so it's 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's when we usually join. 9 p.m. That's when Simon is joining us from the UK. He's always so wonderful. I think right now it's going to be 1 a.m. So we're going to wrap up here, guys. An hour we've gone. But I'm going to try to catch up through the chat. Joey the Roach, Professor, they wanted the right to govern themselves. The Emancipation Proclamation was not written until just near they wanted the right to govern themselves so that they could preserve their slaves. Their real fear was that Lincoln was going to take away their slaves. They did. I mean, California governed itself. New York governed itself. It didn't have a problem with the states' rights issue, but places like Alabama, North Carolina, and Virginia did, and they had a lot of slaves. They had plantations, and they had a deep-seated resentment of Northerners and Northern abolitionists, of which Lincoln was one. Although Lincoln didn't run on an abolitionist platform, in his personal beliefs, he was an abolitionist, which it's interesting to see a politician have personal beliefs that he separates for the good of political strategy and the wiseness of his time. So that, I think Lincoln, yes, the Emancipation Proclamation was written in 1863. 1862, Lincoln wrote it and showed it to his cabinet, who, by the way, Lincoln picked a bunch of people who didn't like him and worked with them because he thought they were the best people to work with him, which was very interesting. And yet, interestingly enough, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation was written in 1862 after the Battle of Antietam because he felt there was a chance they could really win the war. And what happens after the war? What is your replacement strategy? One of the reasons the United States struggled in Vietnam was it didn't have a good replacement strategy other than let corrupt South Vietnamese governments run the southern half of the country. If you have a good exit strategy, you have a good what are we going to replace this with strategy, things can work out pretty well. And Lincoln had that with the Emancipation Proclamation. Nixon was slated to win except for Joe Kennedy and the Mafia in Chicago. He had the cred under Eisenhower, but very true. I would even say he was depressed and suffered. I would agree. Nixon is probably a very interesting psychological case study, and I love psychology and therapy and human behavior. So Nixon would be a great case study for that. I love music. I think that he was going to win, and I think there is a chance the Mafia stole it. And Nixon actually was pressured by his aides to go after that. And he said he didn't want to tear the country apart. But Nixon did believe he got the 1960 election stolen from him, came back and won another election and was the comeback kid at that point. And was under allegations of criminal activity, corruption, and all of that. So there's history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes a lot. And a good example of that is, and I made a video about this just recently, Nixon and Trump have gotten comparisons. Andrew Jackson, Theodore Roosevelt, they've all gotten comparisons to Trump because Trump has that strong personality just like them. Snow Step, I so appreciate that. It's so kind of you to say. C-Dub, we'll see you tomorrow. Ryan, take care. Really appreciate that. Freshly Wild. Oh, and No Step, you're here. So you ask a question, you're going to get an answer. It's so great to see you. What are your thoughts on Rome as it was actively falling, and what did they do to try to keep it up? Aetius, Stilicho, these men basically used really weak imperial pawns as emperors while they tried to basically negotiate with the barbarians. And they did this for decades, trying to basically give the barbarians more land and influence and power while keeping them from attacking and destroying the Roman Empire. And so I think that basically, No Step, the Roman generals continue to try to influence the barbarians. And this was something the Romans had done for a couple centuries. With declining birth rates, smaller armies, and the fear of barbarians, they let the barbarians settle and have land. They promised to pay them to fight in the army. They never did pay them, which led to revolts and riots and all sorts of fighting. Basically, these generals tried to uphold the Roman system by basically working with the barbarians and trying to negotiate with them, or trying to do everything in their power to defeat them, which usually meant bringing in other barbarian tribes to fight against them. I mean, Flavius Aetius, one of the last great Roman generals who did everything in his power to maintain the Western Roman Empire, actually was half barbarian, and so the Roman senators never trusted him, and he was eventually assassinated, which was probably the last hope of the Western Roman Empire. They were also hoping the Eastern Roman Empire would join in, but they were constantly being attacked by barbarians. And by the time you get to the middle of the 5th century, a lot of the Eastern Roman Empire leaders, the emperors and their courts, are basically like, yeah, they'll be fine. So there was active participants. It wasn't just this gradual decline that was imminent and everybody saw it coming, because history is not full of inevitabilities. Right. So I hope that answers your question. No step. It's great to see you have a question and be in the chat. To quote Homer Simpson, the winner will be showered in praise. The loser will be booed till my throat is sore. Absolutely. So what about the West Coast? West Coast, tomorrow's 1 p.m., I believe. 1 p.m. in California. So let me see here. The live is up now. Yeah. So, and you can check the live and see when it actually is if you want. Go into the channel and look at the live tab. Frank Olson's Clange. I don't know who that is, Triglyceride. I'll have to look into that. I appreciate that, but No Step, do what you're doing and launch your channel, and we will all. I will tell everyone to come and subscribe and join you and show you some love and support. Yes, please, English only. And Freshly Wild is asking, see you, I love music, always great to have you around. Freshly Wild is saying, how much was the Romanian currency decline? I think you mean Roman currency decline and a cause for its downfall. A big part of it, and the Roman Empire almost collapsed in the 3rd century because the currency was so unstable. Because basically what Roman emperors did was, in order to pay their generals and their troops and to keep peace, and to basically also be able to afford the bread and circuses where they gave free games and food to as many of the people as they could, they constantly would devalue the currency. So they had gold coins or silver coins, and they accepted more and more impurities in them from copper and other things, bronze, in order to produce as many of the coins as they possibly could. So if you have more copper, and it's easier to get copper and stone and tin and bronze and put that into your coins, then you can make more coins, but the coins will have less value. So they would make coins, and instead of 99% silver, it would be about 85% silver. And because it was 85, and it would be 15% bronze, but you could make about 500 more coins. And this is how inflation actually gets started. There's a lot more coins, but their value is a lot less, and everybody knows it. So as time went on, you continue to devalue, and it goes down from 85 to 75 to 65 to 55, and eventually your money means nothing. It's basically just tin called silver. And the Chinese avoid doing this in the Song Dynasty in the 12th century AD by basically saying that they're going to create banknotes to represent the copper coins, so they don't run out of copper and have to devalue their own currency, and that's where paper money comes from. So Freshly Wild, as the Roman currency becomes worse and worse, people realize that doesn't have the value it needs. It's not going to supply them, and generals aren't accepting this. Soldiers aren't accepting this. There's riots. People are not accepting this. The economy becomes extremely weak, and Rome almost collapses. And it happens over and over again. Yes, the more money, the less money. Basically, works that way. So, anyways, I'm going to sign off here. We've gone a few minutes over, but I really appreciated that. We were on time, which I really always intend to do. I'm sorry I'm tardy so many times. Tomorrow we will be on time starting at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our live stream lecture on C-Dub's topic, the French Revolution. Please check out, I appreciate that. The chat is wonderful with so many great moderators. Please check out the Patreon. Please check out the social media handles and all of that stuff, and my Substack if you want to read my writing instead of just hearing my voice. Feel free to enjoy the long form and short form content we've got here on the channel. And if you want to listen to somebody with maybe a good voice read the Christmas Carol, I've been told I have a good voice. Check it out. Really looking forward to talking to you all about the French Revolution, something we've done on the channel before, but I get to go in more in depth, an entire hour on it. Really looking forward to it. We don't need more. Well, I've got the best one, so I'm happy with who I have right now. We'll see if we get more later on. But I hope everybody has a great and wonderful Saturday evening. Enjoy yourselves. Stay safe out there, and I will see you all tomorrow at our usual time, 4 p.m., where we'll talk about the French Revolution. Please like and subscribe, all that great stuff. Tell all your friends and family. Check out the social media, Patreon, Substack, and keep learning about history. Keep learning and growing. And I will see you all next time. Take care now. Bye-bye.